Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just wait another minute or so for folks to be coming into the Zoom room. It is so interesting. It's such a fluid space of people coming in at so many different times. Great to be here. I do want to, it is 12:45. So I'd like to welcome you to the first of this afternoon's panels. I'm really astounded that they all said yes. They're an incredibly amazing group of speakers for you today. And this panel offers us the opportunity to hear from religious and medical leaders who have been with the dying and grieving in a uniquely close way. They'll share the struggles they've witnessed and experienced in lieu of the pandemic, as well as reflect on insights or lessons they've learned from their roles in relation to COVID patients in this uniquely difficult time. These bedside practitioners will lead us in examining the vocation of caregiving during these times and speak to the role of faith or spirituality for the dying and their families. It's a huge list of topics, and they were told that they could address any aspect of those. And so I'm just excited that they're here. I'd like to introduce the speakers, and then Kendall is working all the magic behind to kind of spotlight and highlight them so that we can see them together and individually. We have with us this afternoon Imam Jamal Ramahan, co-founder and Muslim Sufi minister at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary and adjunct faculty at Seattle University. He's also taught for PLU when we're lucky enough to get him. Imam Ramahan is a sought-after speaker on Islam, Sufi, and spirituality and interfaith relations. Since 9/11, he's been collaborating with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie, affectionately known as the Interfaith Amigos. He has been featured in the New York Times, CBS News, and various NPR programs, and he is a former co-host of an interfaith talk radio and travels nationally and internationally presenting at retreats and workshops. Dr. Dakota Lang is with the Lummi Indian Health Center of Bellevue, Washington. He is the medical director for the Lummi Nation. In an interview with the University of Washington, he said he's glad to be where he is. And he came back to the reservation in 2016 to practice family medicine after getting his medical degree from Weill Cornell Medicine at Cornell University in New York. He also has been pulled away a couple times already to work with patients. So Dr. Lang, we'll just take you as long as we can have you here this morning. So maybe I might have you go first, just in case, since we've got you right now. Rabbi Bruce Cadden is a recently retired rabbi of Temple Beth El in Tacoma and adjunct professor in religion in the religion department at PLU. Part of the faculty of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies and affiliate chaplain at PLU. He and his wife, Barbara of blessed memory, are authors of 3 books in Jewish education. He earned a BA in religious studies at Stanford University and was ordained at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Reverend Mara Forster Smith is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA and has served as a staff chaplain at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle since 2015. Her spiritual care emphasis is surgical oncology and end-of-life care. Reverend Forster Smith holds the MDiv degree from McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago and is board certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains. And lastly, Reverend Koyama is the officiating minister of Tacoma Buddhist Temple starting in 2020, an auspicious year to begin. A West Coast native, he was born and raised in Sacramento, California. Reverend Koyama became an official minister's assistant in 2013, and the following year received his ordination in Kyoto, Japan. He began his education at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California. After graduation, he spent 2 years in Japan studying at a Buddhist seminary and an additional year in a ritual and chanting school. The format of our short hour is to allow each panelist to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. And I will just plan on calling on you if you don't mind, so that we know what order to go in. But we'll start with Dr. Lang. We will open the conversation then for you all to discuss as you would like amongst yourselves as panelists, and then open it to questions from you all, the attendees this afternoon. There will be a couple of us who are watching for questions in the chat, and the speakers don't have to pay attention to that because we'll collate those for you and then hand them to you later on. So you don't have to worry about that. Dr. Lane, welcome, and why don't you take over? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Okay. First off, thank you for having me. Never would have imagined I would have been called into this type of panel. I'm quite honored, particularly to be with my colleagues on the panel here. I always have many questions for all of you all the time in dealing with a lot of the things that come up. I have this from an old one, but I thought it was good because that's, I'm sure many of you, if you're vaccinated, probably remember the day you were vaccinated. That's me, December 17th. I just wanted to highlight that's a glorious day in terms of medical technologies. Just real quick, I know I have 5 minutes, so I'll be really fast. Introduction, talk about patient story, and then COVID data. And then if there's time permits, I'll talk a little bit about Lummi. So a little bit about myself. I'm from the Lummi Tribal member, or I'm a Lummi Tribal member. I'm Catholic. I graduated from Seaholm. I'm also in another life, I was an engineer. I did Peace Corps for a while. That's me with my straight hair fro. I went to medical school. And now I'm the medical director here at Lummi. So let's just jump right into it. I think this is probably the defining moment. I know this is an interfaith panel, and when I deal with patients, often I turn to, like I said, I'm Catholic, I turn to God for dealing with really basically the human condition. So first off, this is, I kind of changed a lot of things, but nonetheless, you get the story. It's a really well-respected elder who presented with COVID-19 back in December. If you recall, 9-10 months ago, vaccines were just coming out. So we were, and also at the same time, we were suffering from a huge surge in cases without much protection against it. And so, unfortunately, one of our elders, who was very well respected, was found to be COVID-19 positive. 3 days later, she calls me, leaves a message on my phone. I didn't answer it right away. I was attending to some other issues. And to this day, that was the last word I ever heard from her, was that voicemail. I ended up deleting it because it just brought up, it still brings me to tears just hearing her suffering. Her O2 sat was 79%. For those of you unfamiliar with that, normal is anything greater than 92%. So she's really hypoxic and close. You know, that's a classic picture. Told her to go to the hospital. Unfortunately, 3 weeks later, she passed. And this was that was our first COVID death. That was really tough for a public health team. Up until this point, we had prided ourselves in preventing deaths from occurring. If you recall, around that time, if you paid attention to Seattle Times, Yakima was really suffering. A lot of the tribes were, they just didn't have the same public health infrastructure that we had, and many other tribes around the nation. Fortunately, God finds us in places you never would expect. She could see I was really suffering, crying, hurt, a little bit of bruised ego, pride, that I couldn't do more. And I have a picture here. Sorry for the Facebook, but this is the Facebook. This is, I couldn't get rid of it, but this is our late Chief Salik, my auntie, Penny Carroll. my Auntie Burnell, and then my Uncle Mike here. And they're collecting yellow cedar from old growth forests and Mount Baker National Forest. But Penny Carroll, who after the death of this elder came and gave me a hug, because really, yeah, I was suffering. And she has her mom and my grandpa were twins, and they were devout Catholics. I grew up Catholic, and felt like a failure. And so she said, well, I'm going to tell you what her mother said, my Auntie Violet. And she said, God wouldn't put obstacles in front of you if you didn't think you could overcome them. And that was exactly what I needed to hear. It made me realize God is in places you'll never expect it. Certainly I was angry at him, angry that he would do this. But that's just how he acts sometimes. Nonetheless, this one statement certainly gave me the strength to go through this, to continue through providing care for the rest of Lummi community, to help with a lot of our public health measures. And I'd like to take that and just briefly diverge and jump into some of the data. We changed it to August 1st because that's our our fourth surge. We've had 645 cases. Since August, we've had 109. For those of you who are wondering, of those 109, 50 of them are, 59 are breakthrough. 50 of them are breakthrough cases. Important. Huh? Cancels? No. No, it's something different. Yeah, can you jump in? Oh, okay. Okay. What? Okay. Sorry about that. So 645 have been tested positive. Of those since August, 59 have been vaccine breakthrough cases. So of the 109, almost over half are actually vaccine breakthrough. This is just categories of exposure. Basically, the green is secondary household transmission. The blue is household gatherings. So between blue and green, which is about 56%, 56% of our COVID transmissions occur within the household. So that's the main reason for transmission. I'll be real quick here. This is more data. It's breakdown by age group. You can see that we've done over 7,500 tests. This is just the picture of the beginning since the pandemic. You can see we had our first surge here in the summer, a little one, and then the terrible one when our unfortunate elder passed away. And now here we are today. And I've eaten up enough of your time. I want to thank you guys for this, and I'll just stop there and certainly can pull this up if you guys need. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lang. Even on the job as you speak here. Thank you very, very much. Imam Ramahan, would you be willing to go next, please?
Yes, certainly. And thank you so much. Such an honor and delight to be here among these, what I call rectangles of love. So I'd like to start with an insight, which I was gifted with some decades ago when my hair was more black. I remember being a spiritual companion to a friend who was in hospice. And, I used to visit very often, say some wise words from the different traditions, recite Rumi poetry, do some chanting. And then one day she took my hand and very tenderly said, Jamal, thank you so much for all those beautiful things. But what I really want is for you to be present. And I said, please tell me some more. And she was in a position to be able to speak to me. She said, if you feel awkward be awkward. Your awkwardness is healing for me. If you're speechless, be speechless. You being speechless is utterly healing for me. If you feel like crying, please cry. Your crying is deeply healing for me. So in that moment, I realized what it means to be present. And I find as I'm present with my feelings, my greatest service to, shall I say, patients or friends in hospice with COVID patients is really to be present. I find that as I'm present with my sadness, it has deepened into a greater empathy. My fear into a greater mindfulness. That's the first point I wanted to make. Then with some COVID patients, I have used this technique, which in Islamic spirituality is called sacred holding, to honor your feelings. The Quran says all feelings are sacred. Fear, anger, sadness. You know, I remember the words of Carl Jung, who studied many Eastern traditions. You know, he would say, would you have the courage and the grace to kiss the demons and dragons within you? That is how they transform into a prince or princess. So I remember with a couple of COVID patients, I took them to the process of sacred holding. My dear friend, feel this feeling. It is sacred. Don't run towards difficult feeling. Don't run away from it. Where do you feel it in your body, this difficult feeling? Hold it with your compassionate awareness, like you'd hold a loved one. Be present with it. Ask it some questions. Do you have a message for me? How may I love you? And there's some other process we go through, and that has been very helpful with COVID patients who have passed away and those who have survived. Of course, with people in this situation, I'm always asked questions about what happens after I die. And of course, as all the different speakers have said, none of us know. And I always remember that insight by the 13th century sage Rumi, who says, you know, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. But amazingly, I have had occasion to actually exchange some humor from the Islamic tradition with some COVID patients. For example, I remember one asked me, as many do, about Judgment Day. And I give the humorous Islamic insight that, you know, on Judgment Day, please remember, as the Quran says, Allah is boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. This is repeated in every chapter. God is boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. So on Judgment Day, you know, God knows everything you have done, whatever you have said, every nanosecond moment of deed that you did. God created you. So maybe on Judgment Day, you can humorously tell God, oh God, please advocate on my behalf with yourself. Please do what is worthy of you, not me. Are prayers heard by God? I'm asked sometimes. I quote the Quran. The Quran says, Allah, the God of all of humanity, is closer to you than your jugular vein, and God listens to every prayer. But most of all, I found that with these friends of mine in hospice or in that COVID situation, I want to be of service. Is there something that needs to be said? Not just in the presence of the universe, in the presence of God, which is wonderful. Do you have a message you want me to pass on to a loved one? Is there something that needs to be done? Some money you owe to somebody? I can arrange that with your relatives. I tell the story of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When he was in his last stage, when he was aware that he's going to die in a very feeble state, he would ask everyone, tell everyone as he attended prayers and he was being helped to go to the mosque, he would say, have I hurt anybody? Do I owe anybody money? Please tell me, please tell me. And they said, why are you saying all these things? You're a prophet. And his famous words were, it is better to blush in this world than in the next world. I'll just bring it to a close by saying that a lot of my work with COVID patients and other people who have passed on is actually with the survivors of the loved one. And the question often asked is, why did my loved one suffer so much? If I have to really summarize it, why do bad things happen to good people? There is no answer. But I love this Islamic story, it's mythology, that the Quran says, of everything we have created opposites. There is joy and there is sorrow. And God gathered all the unborn humanity before sending them down to planet Earth and said, because it's a world of opposites, he took them to a huge cosmic tree. And on the limbs, on the branches of the tree were packages of different sizes. And God said, these are packages of suffering of different sizes. You have to take one before you descend into Mother Earth. And you can choose anyone you want. And the nobler souls among us, the nobler souls, they chose to take the larger packages of suffering so others would suffer less. And so if somebody is suffering, Jamal, don't ask questions. Be grateful and be of authentic service. A question I'm asked very often is, in Islam, can you connect with those who have passed away? Prophet Muhammad said, yes, those who have passed away, their souls, they can hear you. So I do a program called Expression Resolution. You express to the deceased whatever is in your heart to achieve closure. And maybe one last question I'm asked is, how can I sustain this connection with those who have passed away? And Prophet Muhammad said 3 ways. One is by praying for them. So I, for example, pray for my parents every day. I feel a connection. Number 2, leave a body of knowledge. The third one, an act of charity. So every Friday, which is a holy day for Muslims, I do an act of charity on behalf of my parents, for example, and I feel that connection. My friends, I'm looking at the time. I'm thinking my act of charity, of decency is to stop right here. And thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rabbi Cadden, would you be willing to go next?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear the first 2 presentations. I'm going to take it from a little bit different approach. Dr. Trelstad talked about it being auspicious to begin a career during COVID. In March of 2020, I was looking forward to retirement at the end of June and a celebratory last few months. Well, as they say, man plans, God laughs. And so our community really was forced to face the reality of COVID in early March. We had just hosted a concert. Fortunately, it wasn't a singing concert. It was a Violins of Remembrance conference. The sanctuary was packed. And about 10 days later, we were still getting together. There was a group of us who once a month would meet for dinner before our Friday evening Shabbat services. And one of the guests who had actually sponsored the concert in memory of his recently deceased wife mentioned that his daughter and son-in-law who were there had experienced symptoms a couple of days after the concert and had tested positive for COVID. And he was sharing it as if it was nothing at the time, but of course realized the implications pretty quickly. Fortunately, had to leave to get to the synagogue. And after services, sat down with the leadership of our community and laid out everything. So we did what we had to do with contacting people and letting them know. Fortunately, as far as we know, no one else experienced COVID after that. And then, of course, we went about what all communities and work and other things did in terms of planning how we were going to move forward. We first, for example, set up a system to contact everyone in the congregation to check in, see if they needed any help, or those who might be available to help others, and created a database. I matched the first elderly couple who wanted someone to pick up groceries for them with a younger couple who'd volunteered to help. And I knew didn't know each other, but it turned out, found out to be a perfect match, and everyone was grateful to have those opportunities. And we continued to do that moving forward. We offered people help with technology, with rides, and also made sure that we checked in regularly with people who we knew were more isolated than others, who didn't have family members living with them. And kept that going. We, of course, then planned our remote worship. We wanted to make it familiar while acknowledging that things were different. In my first sermon, I talked about learning to live underwater, which is based on an Israeli joke about what you need to do when you're informed that the earth is again going to be completely flooded in 3 days. I think my next couple sermons also reflected a little bit about, how we move forward. Of course, in that particular time, we thought it could be, weeks or the most months. We didn't know that, so much later we'd still be dealing with its effects. So we were pretty naive then, but at least, we faced it head on in terms of that. We were, of course, leading services from home, although I did lead my final service in the synagogue. I really wanted to do that, even though I and the tech person basically was the only ones there. So it was unusual, but felt like that's where I needed to be for my final service before retirement. Spent a lot of time talking with people who could not travel to be with loved ones, but who desperately wanted to do so. Counseled one family who was faced with the situation of a delayed burial of a loved one, because in some communities, they were overwhelmed and couldn't immediately bury those who had passed on. And in the Jewish tradition, it's important to try to do it as soon as possible. So had to, help them figure out how to begin their mourning process even before the burial, and then continue it with the burial. There were those types of situations. Personally, when my mother's illness progressed, I made the decision, fairly early on that I would travel to be with her. First driving down to California, and then later, flying down on occasion. When she passed away in December of 2020, we were, as a family, able to gather for her funeral, following the COVID protocols at the time, which was, a blessing. Also, of course, normally after a Jewish funeral, there is a gathering at the home, and then gatherings in the evening for what we call Shiva services, where community comes to comfort the loved ones. Of course, those couldn't take place in person, but we did do those remotely. And I worked with, after my retirement, some other families who weren't part of the community, but I knew from elsewhere who to set those up and do that. And in certain ways, that proved to be somewhat of a blessing, because it allowed people who normally would not have been able to attend those to be there as part of the service willingness to share their remarks, and that I think brought comfort. I know it did to me and my family, and I think it brought comfort to the others who were able to do so. So that was something, again, responding to the reality of the circumstances and trying to be there as best could for people. Even as things, have begun opening up, I've known that, some people still are reluctant to be in community. And so it's a continual process of reaching out, of caring, of responding to needs, of trying to figure out how to do things that can be done in person while at the same time continuing the remote connection. One thing that we also learned doing our services remotely on a regular basis is that people from the community who had moved away were now able to participate regularly, or distant family members who wanted to connect up with their family could do so. So that's been something that has been important to able to maintain. So so those are some of the challenges that we faced during COVID, and continue to do so as we reimagine what life needs to be like at this point and probably into the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's just so nice to get such a great variety of responses and thoughts among you all. Reverend Forster Smith, I believe that you're next on the list. If you want to take over.
Thank you. Oh, it's so good to be here with all of you today. Thank you, Dr. Trelstad, for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and just so grateful to be speaking with my fellow panelists and hearing your stories of the pandemic. As Dr. Trelstad said, I'm a hospital chaplain. I work at Swedish Medical Center, downtown Seattle, and have served there for the past 6 years, along with 15 other chaplains in the system, my colleagues across 4 campuses. And I serve on a variety of inpatient units, including this past year and a half on the COVID ICUs, as well as the COVID step-down units, along with other units in the hospital during that time. And so I just would be glad to share about my experience as being a spiritual care provider in the context of this pandemic and in the hospital setting. And as I was reflecting back on it, one of the main struggles that has come to mind during this time is how dehumanizing this pandemic is, and how much what that looks like in the hospital setting. And I think about, as I walk on to the COVID ICU each day, seeing these big glass doors with a patient lying there in a bed, often in the ICU on a ventilator, with no family, no one in the room with them, and staff, caregivers going in, just to provide basic care. And how dehumanizing that is, that we as caregivers don't know who this person is, and to just to see this person lying there that we don't have context for, and providing care in that way, and especially around the time of death, and towards the beginning of the pandemic, before visitors were allowed to come in, to have patients dying alone without family there, what that was like for family on the other end not to be there, and then how that is our normal as caregivers in the hospital, that this is the context we come into day to day, and trying to figure out how to just to be in that space each day, continuing to provide care. And as a chaplain, that has been a huge struggle this past year and a half. I feel like my training as a chaplain, I was not trained for this context. The mode that we are trained as chaplains, and our primary mode of providing care, is presence, as Imam Ramahan was talking about, the power of presence. So what does not being able to be with people, be with families, sit at the bedside of COVID patients. What does presence actually mean in this context? And I've really struggled with that. Just having to figure out a new way of providing care and to be present, even if it's over the phone, figuring out telechaplaincy, adjusting to that mode of providing care in a lot of contexts, and the limitations of that, and trying to connect at an emotional, spiritual level with people over the phone or on Zoom. And then my own fears, especially towards the beginning of the pandemic, before the vaccine, of even just coming into the hospital, and my own fear about my own health, my family's fears for me. And then as we've been visiting non-COVID patients in person, my fear about bringing something into the room of these very vulnerable, oftentimes elderly patients. So it's been quite a challenge. And yet I feel this sense of the importance of my role as a chaplain, and how one of the main insights, one of the themes that I've observed is our ability as chaplains to bring ritual into the context of the hospital and into these situations, and the power of ritual really to be able to transcend some of these boundaries around physical space, and to kind of have a rehumanizing effect, impact on patients and staff. And I just want to share one quick story about where that really was the case. I got called up to the COVID ICU. We had a COVID patient who was coding, medical emergency, and there were several staff members in the room providing chest compressions. No family present, several staff standing outside the patient's room in the hallway. And I was called in to provide spiritual care in that moment. And I looked up the son of the patient's phone number and decided to just call him on the phone. And he was completely distressed. I think the doctor had just gotten off the phone with him, giving him the update and telling him the prognosis was grim. And I asked, all I could really ask is, does your dad have a spiritual tradition, or is there a way I could help support you all spiritually at this time? And the son said, yes, he's Christian. Please say some prayers for my father. And so I got off the phone with the son and went to the hallway, and the staff that were outside were kind of talking amongst themselves. And I said, hey, everybody, the family has asked me to say some prayers. I'm going to say some prayers now for this patient. And it was just to see this transformation come over the staff. People quieted down, even though if this was not their religious tradition or practice. Some members bowed their heads, and I offered scripture reading and a prayer. The patient passed away right as I was praying, and it was just a completely transformative moment where ritual did something for the staff to just bring a sense of meaning in this context, to show respect for this patient. It kind of gathered people in, and I knew that the family, knowing that I was praying for their loved one, also had I'm hoping, a comforting effect to bring meaning into that situation. And so I just see over and over again as a chaplain that can be our role right now, that even if we can't be present, there are ways to continue to accompany people in this pandemic. And there's hope in that. And also to sit with people in the spiritual distress that I hear so much about. Where is God in all of this? The moral distress, people's beliefs are shaken by this pandemic. And that brings me a renewed sense of this calling for myself as a chaplain in this context. And I'll stop there, but I can't wait to keep talking about this for the next couple of minutes. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so very much, Mara. We get to sing together in a choir, and Mara is also just a magnificent alto. So beyond being so wise and kind. Reverend Koyama, will you please take the room?
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I think I'm the last speaker. Man, I have my work cut out for me to follow such amazing speakers and um, wonderful company. But thank you all very much for this opportunity to speak to you all today. Um, you know, I love that this is a interfaith panel because, as we can plainly see, COVID, the pandemic has affected all of us, not just Christians, not just Muslim, not just not just Jewish, but Buddhists as well. And I often sometimes try to take away sort of this image of lots of times when people think about Buddhism, they think of these very serene monks who sit on rocks and they just sort of meditate and they meditate their problems away, and then they're also always so serene and they can take things in stride. Let me dispel that. That image, or sort of take that image away, as all of my congregants, or the congregants who I serve, everyone who is everyone who is also Buddhist is also very saddened by the events that have happened. So, no one in my congregation yet, thankfully, has contracted COVID, but other members of my sect of Buddhism have passed because of the virus, and so we are all affected by this. And one of the things that I also continue to tell our sangha is, again, that this is one of the ultimate demonstrations, or the ultimate viewpoints, or the ultimate sort of the ultimate showing of what impermanence and interdependence means. The two I's in Buddhism that are taught a lot are impermanence, that nothing ever stays the same, change is always inevitable, and interdependence, that we are all connected. All beings are connected. Not, when we do actions, or when we make choices, or when we do things, we don't do things in a vacuum. And so now, especially in the time of the pandemic, I say to everyone, is that we have to really, really think about the Buddhist teachings that we are given on a weekly basis when we hear these words like impermanence and interdependence. It's very easy to take these words in stride when times are good, or when we're doing well, and when everyone is healthy. But then when the times change, and change in our routines, and the things that we take for granted are actually, in a sense, I don't want to say forced upon us, but we are required to change our patterns. Then we really have to once again reflect on the ultimate truth in Buddhism, that nothing lasts forever. So a couple of things one of the things that I'd really like to say or reflect on in terms of this is actually coming back to the United States. I was in Japan for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. And, in Japan, everyone wears a mask when they're sick. It's just the thing to do. So I was very shocked and astonished that the United States, in a sense, overnight kind of switched to Japanese culture. But again, this to me was a very strong symbol of impermanence, and how things don't always stay the same. And the saddest part, of course, for our congregation and for the followers of Buddhism, is that we were not able to gather together at the temple. We were not able to gather in person. We were not able to share in the Dharma with everyone. And we actually had to become Zoom experts overnight. We had to become YouTube producers overnight as well, by uploading our services onto YouTube. And we had to find alternative ways to share the Dharma. However, this being said, one of the things that never stops or impermanent is when a person passes away, and people pass away even when it isn't COVID. And I was called upon to do a few bedside services for those people who passed away. And in this regard, thankfully for a lot of these folks, some of their family was able to be present. And the only thing that really changed was the fact that over my Buddhist robes, I had to wear the special hospital garment, and then I had to wear a mask, of course. And so but I still did the chanting. I still chanted some of the sutras to bring comfort to those who have lost their loved ones during this time of the pandemic. And I think for many of us, and for the Buddhists who are, for the Buddhist community, once again, we see that and I like how the previous Reverend was saying how important ritual is to our spirituality, how important ritual is in terms of being able to let go of the ones that who we love. And it's simply a time where it's very sad because we aren't able to gather at the temple and share in the Dharma. People can't chant together. We can't sit together just yet. But regardless, I still see many people, even folks who are in their 70s and 80s using Zoom. People presume that a lot of these folks, right, can't access Zoom, or don't know how to use technology. No, there are plenty of people who their calling and their desire to listen to the Dharma is so strong that they have found ways to access the Dharma as well. So even though this season and this pandemic has provided a lot of sadness for many people, I've also seen amazing changes as well, amazing positive changes where people have become more innovative, people have become more technologically savvy, and it will be very interesting to see how we go forward as a group. And I think the last thing that I want to say is that I think doing events like this are very, very important, where we have interfaith panels, where we can listen to people of all different religions and learn from each other on how we are able to best care for the congregations that we serve. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for this wonderful opportunity, and thank you so much for inviting me. And please be safe out there, and thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our panelists. It's such a rich time here. I had offered to the panelists that maybe they could have the chance to interact with each other, or to, if they would like, there's no pressure at all. And also I have a delightful religion department colleague who has been kind of gathering in questions as well. First, let me just open it up to our panelists, if you'll just stay, I think you're kind of brilliantly spotlighted so that we see you all. And if you'll just stay on, and then my colleague will offer some other questions too. But first, just a chance to interact with each other if you'd like.
I do have a question for my panelists, especially the panelists who are community clergy. And I'm just curious because my context has been inside the hospital, but I just wonder if any of you could share about your role in supporting families or individuals in your communities who have loved ones in the hospital, and what that has been like on the other side of the equation of that disconnect from the outside into the hospital.
We've actually done Friday prayers. Friday is the holy day for Muslims. On Zoom, we have that regularly. This is actually our prayer room right here. So the person in the hospital with the loved one there, or even the nurse, they have, as my colleague was saying, they're using technology to attend the Friday prayers. And then together in the community, we do what is called praying with increased necessity, meaning from the depth of our soul, we pray for the healing of that person, or whatever is in the highest interest of that person. Rumi says, describes what is increased necessity. Rumi says, only when a baby is born does the mother's chest become filled with milk, because there's increased necessity. So on Zoom, we do a lot of increased necessity prayers, and that is very consoling.
Yeah, I'll just add that, for me, it was just giving support to the family member who, especially early on, couldn't be in the hospital with the patient, and making sure they had their needs met. And in at least one case, I remember the couple previous was in a nursing home, so I couldn't even visit the person who wasn't in the hospital to be there with them. So it was just checking in, and fortunately they had other family in the area to help support as well, but that was really tough.
In the aspect of community, yes, of course, through technology, I've done a couple of I have done a couple of Zoom, what we call pillow services, or the bedside service, through the computer, and then of course afterwards, we in the Japanese Jodo Shinshu Buddhist tradition, we have follow-up services that occur after the person has passed. So we have so after the service the person has passed, we have the funeral, then there's the 49-day service, and then there's the 1-year service, and then the 3-year service, and then 7-year service. So these have been continuing to happen, whether through Zoom or if I've actually done more gravesite gravesite services now than I think I have ever done in my career. So.
I also have Dr. Suzanne Crawford O'Brien, who teaches Native American Indigenous religions at PLU, has been kind of collating some questions too. Hi, Suzanne. Or Dr. Crawford O'Brien, to be formal. But you want to offer a few questions. We've got about 9 minutes, and that's it, so that we can have a little Zoom break too.
Well, I have 2 questions that are sort of for everyone, and then I have some questions for individuals, but I think I'll start with the overall questions and sort of invite all of you to respond to these. So first, one of our viewers directed this question at Reverend Forster Smith, but I think this is a question for all of you, which is, what have you found helpful in terms of taking care of yourself emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically while caring for the sickest patients? And having to cope with mortality. So this question, I think, what are you all doing? What sources of strength and renewal do you find? And where do you turn to that for yourselves? How are you taking care of yourselves? And I don't know, shall I get it started, or does anyone want to jump in?
I can jump in. Thank you so much for that question. It's really, wow. That has been challenging at times. The other thing I was going to mention is that as chaplains, we're caregivers for staff, for other caregivers. That's part of our role, and it's become a big focus of our role this past 1.5 years in the pandemic. But there's no one assigned to care for chaplains, and so we do that for each other. That's where I have drawn on the support of my colleagues, and we've really bonded as a team in our departments during this time, and to just debrief when we need to support each other in specific ways, in caring for patients. So that has been a huge source of support for me personally, is my community within my department. But then also, day to day, there are things that I do in the hospital. I bring my own rituals into my practice of, after a visit, to take a couple deep breaths when I leave the room, to take some time to chart, document the visit in between, and to kind of be reflecting as I do that. To go outside and walk around the Seattle University campus, which is right next to Swedish, to be outside in nature. That's where I find a lot of my renewal. And then, as Dr. Trelstad Marit said, I sing in a choir, so that even though we haven't been able to gather in person, we've done virtual choir, and that's actually been a really nice thing during my week, to kind of care for myself, to bring music. Continue to feel connected to music in this time. So those are a couple ways. Yeah.
I'd like to mention something which is in every tradition, silence. I practice a lot of silence. There's no such thing as a Muslim or Buddhist silence. It's just silence. And as the Islamic mystics, or many of them have said, we are like fish out of water, thrashing and quivering on the banks. And so from time to time, it's so beautiful to enter and dive into those oceans of silence. So that is something I do in privately and also in community, just practicing silence.
Yeah, I found that continuing to connect with colleagues was very helpful, as well as continuing to do running when it was okay to run outside without having to deal with too many of the elements, and other types of things like that were quite helpful for me.
I guess for me, it's my family. I have a wife and 3 kids. And so when I'm at home, I stay home. For example, yesterday, my 4-year-old learned how to ride a bike, and I was present for that. I echo what Imam Ramahan is saying about being present. That's a conscious effort to do. It really helps, particularly when faced with kind of how the choices are for guiding our public health response at home. And I also run. I love running. And then my probably a nice habit that I continued since childhood is playing video games when I get time. Oh, one other thing, I've certainly rediscovered Catholicism. Not rediscovered, I just have really used that as my foundation. Every Sunday I do online church.
I would say take a break from the news. I actually, I'm not saying don't watch the news, right? You should always, we should always be informed and should always be aware of what's happening around us and around the world. But, the news is the news, and they will say it again and again and again. I've actually, instead of having the news on, I'll actually switch it to a calming, and I think this is closer to what Reverend Forster Smith said. Is I have some very delicate piano music going on, and because it really, and it's like on a 24-hour loop and everything, and it's just, it's just finding those moments where you can be, listen to something pleasant and listen to something soothing, as opposed to statistics and the latest terrible thing that happened or the latest calamity. Again, we should know these things. We should always be aware of these things, and we should be informed. But if we drown ourselves, I think, in watching those things all the time, it can also be very draining on us. So.
Suzanne, may I offer just one more, because this is something we do regularly in our community, laughter therapy. And we talk about our own death and laughter. So for example, I always offer the insight, of the Islamic mystics who say, here, Jamal, you're so scared that you will go into non-existence. But if the truth be known, non-existence is trembling in fear. It might be given human shape. And we all laugh and laugh. And there's just one more we say all the time, Jamal, when you do go over to the other side and you look back at your life, and all your dramas and melodramas, you will laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. But why wait? Why don't you laugh right now? So we all laugh again.
Thank you. So the other question, I don't know how much time we have for this one, but this is I think one of the themes that came through all of your talks was about how you all are adapting in these creative ways, adapting ritual, adapting care, adapting community support, finding these new ways to be present. I think that was a thing, this question of it's this spiritual and practical imperative of presence, and how we do that when we can't be present, right? When we have to do this one step removed, whether it's behind a glass door or whether it's behind a Zoom screen. But we have to find these new ways to be present. And I'm wondering, it may be too close quite yet, but are there lessons that you're taking away, either very practical lessons or spiritual lessons that you're taking away from this new ways of being present? That it's sort of forcing us into this creative space. And I'm wondering if there are kind of takeaway lessons that you're taking from this that you want to keep, again, both practical or spiritual.
I talked about how even at a distance, been able to connect with people. And I know I had a great conversation with someone whose father had passed away and been a prominent member of the congregation I served in Salinas, and probably would not have been able to if it had been a traditional Shiva, but he had arranged times and we were able to share some really wonderful memories. So I'm hoping that that will continue, as things perhaps make it a little more easier to be in person with each other. There's still, don't forget that option for people who can't be there.
I just remind myself of this one insight, which is my most favorite insight. Blessed are the flexible. Blessed are the flexible, for they will never be bent out of shape. I always remind myself of that.
I know we are at time, so I'll jump in and just want to say thank you really for everything in this time. There's so much experience and wisdom, and thank you for your caregiving for our people in all of our different religious traditions. So deep gratitude and thanks to each one of you for this afternoon and for the work that you're doing. We will reconvene at 2:00 if you want to take a little time to stretch and go walk around outside. Use Mara's advice on that. But we'll be back at 2:00 with a panel that gives some resources on some of those rituals. Really, that's why I asked Samuel Torvin to talk about rituals and kind of end-of-life decisions, body burial theology, African-American grief, all kinds of options that we have, and mental health in these times. So thank you for this afternoon. Thank you.